Good morning. Good morning, all elementary staff, principals. Our superintendent is here. Good morning. I believe that we have Sarah Lim Christensen here, some other district staff and officials, and I believe we might also somewhere in these 8 pages have some of our middle and high school administrative team. I want to welcome you all this morning. My name is Nicole Watson. I am the new proud principal of the best elementary school, Prescott. Just joking. I mean, I don't want to start any fights or wars here, team. We can rock, paper, scissors it out. I see you, Ms. Regacious, in the corner up at the top. I'm so happy to be with you this morning. I want to give you a brief orientation about what we're going to do today. I'm going to share my screen and get rocking and rolling, but I want to just model what it means when we do something for the first time that we don't always, doesn't always go the way that we expect. 2, I want to give a little bit of grace, a little bit of wait time, and I want to be as fluid as possible, right? We're learning something and we're engaging together all elementary staff, and this might be a little bit new. Thank you so much for the welcomes. Thank you for the personal love in the chat. Feel free to love on one another. We'll spend some time doing that towards the end of our time together. But we're gonna have fun today. Before we get super started, I just want to calm you for a second. I know there's been a little bit of apprehension and a little anxiety about what we're going to do today. I'm going to mute you if I hear some things in the background. Please don't take it rude. It's just my ability to be able to keep 163 of us all centered and focused where we want to be. Hey, friends, could you all mute? Yeah, if you could. That just kind of helps with some of this background noise. That's all. So if you are, if you don't mind, if you could just do me a favor, not because you need it, but maybe because I need it. If we could just take a big deep breath. Can you take a deep breath in, hold it for a second, and then let it out. And we do that 2 more times. Once more, take a deep breath in and let it out. Rosinda, I love that you're lifting your arms. I love that you're lifting your arms. Take one more big deep breath in, hold it, and then make that sound as you let it out. Here we go, take it in. Hold it, and then whoo. All right. Okay. Just so that we feel what's happening in our bodies, we recognize the ground that's underneath our feet. We are ready to move. I'm gonna, John MC, looks like you have your hand raised. Did you have a question? Okay. Yeah, Kendra is in the background. She's gonna do a lot of our tech. Kendra, is it possible for you to be muting folks? You have permission to unmute yourself, but our tech in the background is gonna mute you just in case background noise becomes an issue. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. We are recording this morning. I don't know if I mentioned that already. We are recording. Let me share. Give me just 1 second, team. Give me 1 sec. I'm not entirely sure where it went. While I do that, Liz, our new lead secretary at Prescott, has dropped in the chat a sign-in, but I'm gonna ask you not to use that sign-in. What she didn't know is that last minute, we created one as principals that gives us an opportunity for everybody to be on one spreadsheet. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna drop something different in the chat for you to use as your sign-in sheet. I appreciate your patience, y'all. I know this is a bit much. All right. So here comes the sign-in sheet. No matter which school you are in, if you don't mind signing in, You're just gonna put your name, your staff email address, and under the corresponding school that you belong to. You don't mind using this. I've also put miscellaneous for people who are coming in from a different, maybe from the district office, or that will help us keep our housekeeping in order. All right, while y'all do that, I'm gonna go back to trying to figure out what is up with my screen. If you are on a Chromebook, you won't be able to click the link. You'll have to actually copy and paste it into your user browser. And if you're wondering what W or WB or POC stands for, so we are having you rename yourselves when you enter this space. What that will do is when we break out into affinity groups later, those of us and Kendra who's doing the background technological pieces will know which breakout room to put you in. So if you identify as white or not a person of color, then you would put a W. You sometimes will see a WB, and we'll explain a little bit about what that means, but that just means white bodied. That means you identify, you show up, you present without knowing who you are and what your racial identity is. You present as a white person, but you might be a person of color. So we'll get into a little bit of that when we start our presentation, but for now, you can just use the terms W for white and POC. You can add your rows. You can add rows in your spreadsheet, because if you can edit it, then you can add a row to it. I love it. I'm seeing it all happen. All right. I'm just looking for some of the information in the chat. All right. I'm going to share my screen. I'll get to that question in just a second. So I have shared my screen, but you can stay where you are to just give a few more minutes for you to sign in. And that spreadsheet will be there all day. I just want to give you a second. Let me do a scan. If you know how to use your reactions, you can give me a thumbs up in your in the reaction space if you are ready. That would be helpful. Oh, I see it. Thank you, Ms. Bayer. Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Matt and Brian and Nathan and Andrew and Wendy and Jasmine Show and Joelle. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Those buttons don't stay long. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Hannah. Love the hue of your emoji. I love it that you're changing your emojis. I love it. Thank you, Nina. All right. Whew. I love it. Please feel free to keep using the chat. So, you can find the link to sign in your chat. We wanted you to rename yourself, your Zoom profile with your first name, your last initial, and whether you identify as a person of color or white for your racial identity. And of course, in the chat, you can shout out your school and tell us what grade you teach. Keep it friendly, team. We don't want the battle to start just yet, but that would be really, really awesome for you to shout out your school, what grade you teach in that chat. That'll help us build some of our relational trust. And as we go ahead and get started, and because I'm sharing my screen, I'll come back to questions once I hand off to one of our facilitators for today. But before we start, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. And I know we think about, or we've heard about, or we've seen land acknowledgements popping up all across academia and all across the nation currently as we are grappling with what does it mean to be on indigenous land? What does it mean to be on land that is not ours, land that we assumed unfairly, unrightly? What does that mean that we are acknowledging the land that we're standing on? So this land acknowledgement might look a little different, but I'm gonna read it. And then we're gonna give a little bit of space of silence just to sit in the bones of what does this mean? What does this mean for our bodies? How are we grappling with what it means to acknowledge land that is not ours? So I want you to think of the stories. Let's think of the songs and the artworks that must have been spun in those snug, smoky houses over the endless months and centuries of incessant rain. The baby making and gossip and back scratching, an uncountable loss of fortune of human life or human experience that echoes across these broad waters. I'm gonna give you a second to look at the image associated with this picture, with this slide. Look at the trees, the structures, the ground, the totem poles, the artwork, the language, the people. Once there was a people that were so wealthy, plump, and sleek that they drank sea lion oil straight and didn't have to look for food all winter long. They danced and sang and recited stories instead. These people's upriver neighbors bent under 90-pound packs. These people just carried their big boat down to the river, piled in several tons of trade goods, cranberry preserves, smoked salmon, dried clams, 6 or 7 kinds of vegetables, fur robes, and arrow-proof battle armor, and paddled 100 miles or so up the river to trade. They were the mightiest tribe in the Columbia Basin. But this way of life was doomed by the arrival of settlers, traders, and the germs of endemic in the European population. I want to give you a second to look at this image of people, of ground, of structure, of language, of culture. Bless you.
Uh-oh.
That's all
Thank
right.
you.
No worries. All right. The 19th century, I'm moving my chat window down so I can see. 19th century plagues forced integration with white culture and deliberate government policies aimed at denying them from their presence around the strategically important mouth of the Columbia. This all played a role in making the modern Chinook less visible today than many other less consequential tribes. But the Chinook endured. Today, the Chinook Indian Nation, with its headquarters in Bay Center on the eastern shore of Willapa Bay, is engaged in a concerted effort to win White House support for the restoration of its official status as a federally recognized tribe. I'm going to give you a moment to look at this image. When you look at the instruments, the t-shirts, the hat, the feathers, the drums, the structure, the markings on the walls, on the beams and the pillars. And I want to just sit for a second because we often talk about our land and land acknowledgements, but we oftentimes don't sit with what that means. What are we acknowledging? Are we just giving a nod to the fact that we're standing on land that is not ours? Or does something happen in our bodies when we recognize what it is, what it means, what it could be, what it should be? And how do we develop this opportunity to acknowledge the land that we stand on in a way that isn't performative, that isn't just, oh, I'm reading something and I'm acknowledging the land, but what does it mean to build relationships with the land and the peoples whose land this is? So we have a really awesome tool now called the Native Land app that you can type in your address and it will share with you what tribe you're on and the languages and the territories of that tribe. And the Chinook tribe is so vast, but within Chinook, for instance, where Prescott sits, we're on Cowlitz Chinook land. My next goal will be to reach out to the Cowlitz and Chinook people to establish a relationship, to ask permission. What is permissible and is not permissible to share about their culture. That's a relationship we at Prescott have got to build. So it goes beyond just acknowledging the land and actually moving into a posture that can accept that we've not fostered a relationship. So when we offer a land acknowledgement, we're not also building a relationship. There's that performative allyship. And I don't want to be a performative ally. I want to move from allyship and into activism and become a co-conspirator with our Indigenous Black, brown brothers and sisters so that I'm not complicit in what it means to just acknowledge the land, but continue to uphold the very things that took their land. I'm going to give a moment for that, just to sit. The next slide I'm going to share with you is about our key focuses for today. But I don't want to rip you from where we are, so I'm going to transition slowly. In the chat, this would be a really great time for us to check in on a compass, so to speak. Where are you with that? What words pop up? What are you feeling about it? What belief are you holding about it? We're not going to respond to it, but we do need to release it and acknowledge that it exists. The best way for us to do that is in the chat. With what I'm seeing with the forest fires and the air quality, I'm thinking about our Indigenous Black brothers and sisters and what would it mean to have relationship with our Indigenous natives at this time? What would that look like for Prescott, for Russell, for Shaver, for Sacramento, for Park Rose? What would that look like? So just drop in the chat what's happening in your body. I love this, the image here, the words, dig deep, dig deep. Dig deep. Just drop your word in. We'll come back to this in a little bit. So for today is about building connections. Today is about sharing. Today is about practice. We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like across the district. We're going to talk about what our vision is for the fall and how we're going to come together in professional development because it's going to be different this year. And then we're going to spend some time in a culture of appreciation, which is one of my favorite parts. So we're going to build and we're going to connect, which means we're going to actually orient ourselves, and then we're going to use our prior knowledge. Where are we showing up? How are we coming in? We're going to connect those things together to a larger vision. We're going to share. We're going to lean in today. We're going to be a little vulnerable. And what I always share with my staff, and I took this from a colleague of mine, she talks about brave spaces. I remember when I first started to lead racial equity PDs, one of the things that many of the participants will always share is, can you keep me safe? My answer to you is no, we cannot. We cannot keep you safe. Because safety would mean that you may not leave impacted, or you might not leave triggered, or you might not leave harmed. The moment we step outside of our homes, the moment we engage in something out of our comfort zone, we are not safe. What I can ask you and invite you into is courage. Courage to feel that discomfort. Courage to acknowledge what is happening in your body. Courage to lean into bravery instead of safety. When we are safe, we are not growing. When we are comfortable, we are not moving. It's when we are in places of discomfort that real change and transformation can take place. I want to be transformed. I want to be changed. So I have to be uncomfortable. So we cannot offer you safety today. What we can offer you is an opportunity to be brave and to lean into courageous conversations around race and gender and ability. And for some of us, this will be a huge leap. For others, this will be a short walk. So as we build connections, we're going to recognize that we're not all coming at this from the same space or positionality. This is where having grace and assuming best intentions and giving each other room to be and to flatten our edges and to sit with this discomfort, however that shows up. We got to give each other space for that. We got to practice. Same way we would tell our babies. They're not expected to be proficient at something we just start. We got to practice. Practice being in community. And then we're going to talk about what does that look like across our district? And what is our vision for the fall? And how do we spend some time in a culture of appreciation for one another? Okay. So, Rebecca, I forgot. So we're gonna do a quick introduction. A colleague of ours who's gonna lead us in our racial equity affinity spaces is Rebecca Greenidge. And I know you've been hearing about her in our one-on-one individual spaces on our campuses. But she graciously put together our presentation for us today, which was the startle. I forgot that our pictures were here. So we're gonna do a little bit of an introduction. Again, I'm Nicole Watson. I'm the new principal at Prescott. I'm so excited to be here. Parkrose is a magical place. And I don't know, I walk in my building every day and I kind of pinch myself like, one, how did I get here? And two, how did I get this lucky? My staff is incredible. They are gifted and brilliant in all the ways that make this experience of building in COVID a treat, in spite of, I know what we're dealing with and the anxiety that it brings, but it's been a magical place. I come from PPS. Last year, I was a classroom teacher on work release as a TOSA in our union, Portland Association of Teachers, and I was building racial equity for the district. So this is my jam. I do love conflict. I know that sounds weird to say. I do love conflict though. Conflict teaches us more about ourselves than it does the thing we're mad at. But I also love building relational trust. I believe that through critical love theory, that we have an opportunity as human beings to do some incredible things together. We just sometimes get in our own way. Today is about us getting out of our way. That'll be my introduction. Other than that, I've been a classroom teacher. I've been in this about 10 years. Yeah, that's what I'll share. Our next introduction will be Megan. Megan, can you unmute yourself and introduce who you are and where you are principal?
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry for the background knowledge. I'm going to move. My name is Megan Filio, and I have been in the district for 3 years, entering my 3rd year right now. I was a teacher at Shaver. I taught ELD in 1st grade there. I'm really, really proud of my staff. I'm really proud of our school. We've been doing this equity work along with the district, and our team is just really excited to dive into it further. And I'm just really, really happy to be back and with our team and with our school district united in this project. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Megan. Our next leader will be Miss Samantha Regation.
You might want to mute yours. Geez, nice pick.
So if the volume doesn't work, we can always turn our videos off and then talk. I know it's going to be wonky. Sorry, team.
I'm Samantha Regatius. You want to hit your volume. I'm at Russell Elementary. I've been it this way. Go Rockets. I know the entire staff here is excited to be part of this transformation, this changing process for this school year, unlike any other. And our whole entire staff knows that we want to say that we're rivals with just one school, Prescott, but we are rivals with all of you. So be prepared, the other schools. We're above and beyond what we're going to be doing here. not just because of our years of experience, that might be principal years of experience, but our staff is all on board with everything that we're doing here. We are really excited for what is coming our way with our practices in equity. So be prepared of what's coming your way. Thank you.
Thank you, rivals. And our last but not least, principal of Shaver, Ms. Laura.
Good morning, everybody. Many of you know me. I'm Laura Goodman. I'm principal at Shaver School. It's the 7th year here. I feel very fortunate and humbled and proud to be part of Shaver School community and be the principal here. Incredible, amazing. Not enough words to describe the team here of educators. So very fortunate to be here and also be part of the Park Rose School District. We have been diving into equity, racial equity work as a school for several years now, and really appreciate the work we're doing together here. And I'm particularly excited that we're going to do this cohesively across our 4 elementary schools and join together principals and all the staff. And I really love that we're making sure all our staff can be part of this as we journey through this together. So really excited that we'll be able to cross between our schools and cohesively dive into this work together. So good to see everyone here today. And as Sam did, go Tigers.
I love it. Thank you so much. This next part is how we got here and why race-based affinity. So I'm going to spend just a few seconds explaining this piece. As a new principal, the moment I came in, Laura and Megan and Sam have been an incredible resource, an incredible support to me. One of the first opportunities that we've been having to brainstorm and to really collaborate has been around professional development. How are we going to do this? If we have these really great new tools, how can we use these tools to be able to do some things radically different? And how do we show up and be present in a time right now where there's some political unrest and there's some turmoil of what's happening in our world around this pandemic? And how do we show up as culturally responsive educators? What does that look like? How do we give our team the tools that they need to show up and be their best selves? So how we got here was starting with that. One of the things that we talked about as a principal team or as an administrative team is what risks do we get to take, and how can we push to get further beyond where we've kind of felt not stagnant, but where we've kind of felt that the work sometimes stalls, right? So how do we have this intellectual knowledge, we've got these frameworks, we understand definitions, we're reading Zaretta Hammond, and we're reading Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility, and we understand, I got all the books on my shelf, you have many of the books on your shelves, which means we have a lot of the tools and the frameworks. As I began to kind of study and research and think about what could professional development look like at Prescott, I realized, 1, we cannot do this work in a vacuum, and 2, we should not do this work in isolation. And we tell ourselves that as educators all the time, that this work cannot be done in isolation. And yet, it is really easy in this field to isolate ourselves, to get in our classrooms, shut our door, and get down to the business of teaching babies. One of the things that I really wanted to model with my new team is what does a collaborative approach look like? And how can we move past what we know up here, and how do we get it to who we are and what we bring to this work? When we think about consciousness raising, so consciousness raising is a term that we're going to hear a ton in academia because it's new. And like synchronous and asynchronous, we like shiny new terms in education. And so consciousness raising is this new concept or a way of us understanding, how do I become aware of the system and how I'm oppressed by it? That conversation around our consciousness is oftentimes done in professional developments where we have worked all day, or we've taught all day long, and then we come and we sit in a library, or we come and we sit in a space, and in that space We have a little bit of snacks, we sign in, and then our leader gets up and leads us in a professional development. I don't know as a teacher if I have really fully felt the transformative change that I need to feel as an educator standing in front of children in those particular ways in which we've done professional development. So one of the things that I asked our administrative team is, can we take a risk? Can we do something different? Do we have to do it the way we've always done it? Or is there space for us to dream a new dream and to create a new normal? And since we have this opportunity with these new tools and a new way of orienting ourselves around COVID, is there a way for us to lean into courageous teaching and culturally responsive teaching, and a way for us to be culturally responsive in our PD? They agreed, and we kind of put our heads together. What we've come up with is, when we think about consciousness raising, in order to really consciousness raise, and when we say consciousness raising, it's the words mean how they sound. It is raising our consciousness. We are becoming more aware of the systems that are around us. When we think about how we consciousness raise, the only way we can really do that effectively is if we are unpacking our experience about race with people who are oppressed by the system in the exact same way. Let me say that again. In order to consciousness raise, we have got to be unpacking our positionality, how we are impacted by race, with people who are impacted by race in the exact same way. That is true consciousness raising in the way the Combahee River Collective, the feminists that created it, when we think about that term, it can only be done effectively if I get to unpack my experience with people who experience it in the exact same way. That is true consciousness raising. So when we think about how do we do that in a staff, we have to break out an affinity space, which means in order for our white-bodied folks, in order for folks who identify as white, or our white-bodied folks, in order for you to be able to really unpack your experience of what does it mean to be white identifying or walk and present as white in our district, in our buildings, you have to be able to unpack that experience with other people who share that identity or share that experience, so that you can wrestle with these tensions, that you can unpack these concepts, that you can share, that you can build connection, that you can build coalition. That has to be in a space where you are doing it with people who are impacted in the system by the exact same way. So let me give an example. Our administrative team, if we all identify as women, then we as women in this district, as leaders, as principals, get to be able to have an affinity space. And as women, we get to talk about what does it mean to be leaders and what does it mean to identify as woman in Park Grove School District. That is an affinity space. But if we were going to really have a race-based affinity space, Nicole, me, as the one person of color in our administrative team, I would need to be able to have an affinity space with people who are identifying the same way I do and are oppressed by the system in the exact same way, in order for us to have a race-based affinity space. And that's important because as a leader of color, my experience is different than my colleagues. My experience walking this district and walking through these halls and walking in this building and walking to our district office is different than it would be someone who does not identify as a person of color. So I lean in really, really heavily to Andre Goodlow, who's the assistant principal of the high school, and Antoinette Harrison, who is the assistant principal of the middle school. We, as admins of color, can create an affinity space so that we get to unpack what is our experience? What does it mean to lead in a district? And how do we wrestle with those tensions as not only people of color, but as Black identifying folks? What does that feel like? So when we ask the question about why race-based affinity, it is so that we get to, one, separate our experience, but that we get to provide a little bit more of that safe space that most people are looking for when we engage in racial equity work. Because what often, or all too often happens, is you get in a professional development and it is whole staff, and your Black and brown indigenous folks are in the room while your white body folks are unpacking their experience, or vice versa. And we begin to tokenize one another. People don't feel like they're open to share. People don't feel like they get to be authentic with their experience. And people do not get the opportunity to really share with confidence with people who are oppressed by the system in the same way. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for just a moment, just so I can come back and do a check. see how facial expressions are looking, posture is looking, feeling. Because this is where we are leaning into this discomfort. This is going to be different. This is going to be different. But in order for us to really be able to drill down, in order for us to really be able to drill down about our experience, we have to be able to do that in spaces where we are not harming each other by our experience. And if I begin to share with you my experience about being a Black woman in Park Rose in just 30 days, that experience may not land well. And I don't feel safe enough to have that conversation in this current space. But when we are in affinity space, and I get to be with Indigenous, Black, and Brown people, and I get to share what that experience is like, I'll feel a little bit more comfortable. We'll still have to build some relationships. I don't get to just come in hot, right? I'll still have some relational trust to build, but at least I'll be able to be in a space where people are oppressed by the system in the same way. And I know you might be thinking, perhaps you are or not, are white people oppressed by the system? Absolutely, absolutely. This is the shape of our water. We are not taught to talk about these things. And when we are taught not to talk about them, we're also not equipped for when things happen, how to heal each other. We are not given space. We're not giving opportunity for us to be able to do what we're encouraging our children to do, to agree to disagree and go play. We forget the go play part. And we lean into, I disagree, or they harmed me, or they took the copy paper out the copy machine and they didn't put no more in there. Or they didn't hold the door open, or they didn't put a miss in front of my name because I'm an elder and I want you to put some respect on it. Or they didn't ask me my gender pronouns, you assumed. And now I'm uncomfortable correcting you because I'm still figuring out my identity and where my liberation lies. All of these things we're grappling with. And when we add a pandemic, not seeing each other for 6 months, and we add the racial trauma that we are experiencing in real time, regardless of where you stand on the issues, we are traumatized. And if our babies show up traumatized, then don't our adults? Aren't we coming in hot? Aren't we trying to figure out how to redo life together? And we're tripping all over each other. And for our Indigenous, Black, and Brown folks, it can be daunting when there is a space where we don't get to feel safe. And for our white folks, that's the same. We have questions and we need to unpack those questions in spaces where we can liberate each other because our positionality is up against the system in the same way, okay? I invite you to lean in to discomfort here. I promise you that me and your other principals have your very best interests at heart. We go hard for you. Sam and I fight about which is better, Prescott or Russell, all the time. But we know what the truth is. I don't care what she's holding up in her screen. I don't care. Nobody cares about the Rockets, okay? Corinne, darn it. But do you see that? We are already building trust. I trust my teachers 100%. They are the best standing in front of our kids. I believe it. So I would not put anything in front of them that I do not feel is the absolute best for their practice. And I just met them. So imagine what Megan feels, what Laura feels, what Sam feels. This is not going to be what you're used to. But we cannot do the same thing and expect different results. Our children need us to transform. They need us to evolve. They need us to be courageous. And the time is right now. There is no time to waste. Our babies are waiting for you. And if you don't talk about race, and you don't talk about gender, and you don't talk about ability, then we are upholding the very thing we're trying to dismantle every single day. We cannot be silent. We cannot remain silent another moment. Our babies are trying to grapple with these concepts. Let's lead them into the light, but you cannot lead them where you have not been. So I'm going to transition us and I'm going to introduce our racial equity facilitator, who's going to spend some time with our white and white identifying staff members. When we break out into affinity space, I will facilitate our educator of color space. And I won't facilitate it forever. But first, I want to meet with the educators of color because one, I need a space too, because y'all, I can't wait to see y'all. I need a space where I can let my hair down and I could just breathe and I could just share safely what my experiences have been so far. From there, the educators of color will build what our race-based affinity space will look like and how we drill down. Maybe we'll have a queer identified educator of color space. Maybe we will do a biracial or mixed race or white passing educator of color affinity space. We will drill down when we get in that space together. If you are confused, if you feel like, I identify as a person of color, but I show up white, I don't know where to go. Go where you feel the most comfortable. Change your name to where this is not a question about, are you a person of color enough? Or that's not what we're here to interrogate. So we're gonna leave it up to you, but if you don't change your name, then we won't know where you need to be, which means you won't have anywhere to go in your PD. So we definitely need you to be able to identify yourselves as either white or person of color so that when we break out in race-based affinity spaces, you have somewhere to be. Lean into discomfort the same way you would for our kids and try it. And once we come back together, whole group, and we do our PD exit survey, we can talk a little bit about how to tweak and fine tune the experience. Okay? I'm seeing some love in this chat. I love it. I love it. We are building trust. Somebody said that Prescott could jump on a rocket. Oh, Carrie P, might have to fight ya. I love it. We are all incredible, all of us. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Rebecca Greenidge, who is our facilitator for our white-based affinity spaces. And I'm not gonna spend a huge amount of time here because I feel like I've already gone way over. My apologies, Rebecca. But I wanna be able to, one, lay the framework, and two, build some relational trust. And this is our first time together. And this is my first time with you here. I love it. There are 12 of us in transportation. We have both identifying groups in the room. Okay. So what we will do, I will come back to that once I hand it over to Rebecca. I'll circle back in the chat and help our transportation folks find a solution to their really awesome problem of what they're having. So Rebecca is on a mission to abolish white dominance. Woo, that's meaty. That's not like breakfast. That's all lunch, dinner, and the dessert. She is on a mission as a white person to abolish white dominance. What I love about when I see her facilitate, I've seen a ton of facilitators, and we could have put a ton of facilitators in front of you. But what I love about Rebecca, and what I think that she offers, is that critical love that I referred to earlier. We talk a lot about critical race theory, but critical love theory is my way of describing that we need to be talking about race in critical ways, but we also have to do that with an undercurrent, an underlying component of love and of compassion. That's a little bit of Malcolm and a little bit of Martin mixed together. Because I don't believe that without love, we really can heal and build what we call beloved community. Beloved community is absolutely essential. And we talk a lot about King, but we talk about the peaceful King. Dr. King was not peaceful. Dr. King was not violent. But he was not peaceful because peace means no unrest, no disruption. Peace just means status quo. He was not peaceful. I don't know where we get that idea that he was peaceful. He was nonviolent. He didn't want to do the things, but he did care about them. And when I think about Rebecca, I love that she holds the affinity space for white educators with such a love and compassion, something I, as a Black woman, cannot do. Not because I don't love you, but because my positionality in this system is different than yours. I don't know what it means to be white or white-bodied and lead through a transformative process to healing or to liberation or to consciousness or awareness. I don't know what that's like. So I can't lead you there. We needed to put someone in front of you who could. I'm gonna give her opportunity to give more background about her husband and about her children and about what brought her to this work. because I could be in front of you all day and then we will never get to our PD. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Rebecca Greenidge of JOR Consulting. I will drop her information in the chat, which you might already have. But if you feel free, Rebecca, you can take it over from here, my dear.
Awesome. Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everybody. It's good to see you. You can wave back. Oh, it's really nice. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Nicole. I just want to acknowledge I don't enter this space today with you all, first without Nicole, and I'm super appreciative for the relationship and the friendship and the ways that we've been able to collaborate together. So thank you, Nicole, for that. I'm eternally grateful. And I also don't enter this space without relationships with Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. I have been taught and taught and taught and taught. And so everything that I understand at this point first began, it was the first impetus from Black and Brown and Indigenous folks who spent time with me, who loved me, who challenged me, who strengthened me, who checked me, who just kept showing up and who held me capable and able of doing better. So I, in turn, do the same for white-bodied folks that I get to work with. I primarily work in white affinity with white-bodied folks. That is my role, to be working with my people. And so I've been doing that for several years now, and I love it. I love it, I love it. And yes, I'm on a mission to abolish the system of white dominance. It is a system that oppresses, and I'm appreciating Nicole kind of talking about the impact for all folks. But the impact for white folks is a different impact. And we also need to be able to talk about that. So thank you for having me here. Thank you for inviting me to this space and for warmly welcoming me. A little bit about me. I grew up in Eastern Oregon in La Grande. I'm a small town girl raised in a very conservative environment, conservative politically, conservative in many, many ways. And one of the things that we often ask white folks to do is to examine how we first learned about race, or when we first knew that we were living in a white body. And one of the things that's important about that question is to notice the age differences of when those things happen. So for white folks, that happens usually at a much later age than it does for Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks. So we need to notice that, but we also need to notice how it impacts us. And so it's not just about when we noticed it, but what was the meaning we made of it. And so my story of when I first noticed race was when I was in the 2nd grade. So 7 years old, right around in that age range. I was going to school with all my classmates which I didn't have any person who identified as Black, Indigenous, or Brown in my class that I was aware of in the 1st grade or 2nd grade. The girls in my classroom were largely blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls. I was the only dark-haired girl, I was one of 2 dark-haired girls in my classroom. And all of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls got together every Friday night for a sleepover. And I was never invited, and neither was the other dark-haired girl. And so that went all through 1st grade. And then by the time 2nd grade showed up, I got the courage that fall to ask if I could come to one of the sleepovers. And I was told, no, you can't come. You don't belong here, and you need to go back to the reservation. So I didn't know what that meant, but I felt a tremendous amount of shame about that. And in 2nd grade, I wore my hair, cut off bangs, classic 80s, and 2 really long braids. I loved wearing 2 long braids. And so I think that I internalized that messaging had something to do with how I was wearing my hair, because what happened was my mom found out about this conversation because the next day when I went to have her do my hair, I asked her to put my hair in a ponytail instead of in 2 braids. And she asked me why, because she knew I loved wearing my hair in braids. And I told her what had happened. And what she told me was, those are silly girls, and just to ignore them. So in that moment, that's where we need to understand how we make meaning of things. So in that moment, we didn't talk about race. We didn't talk about that I had been misidentified as Indigenous because of my dark skin coloring, my dark hair, my dark eyes. When I'm in the sun a lot, I have olive complected skin, and so I turn really dark. And so coming back from a summer where I'm outside playing all the time, it's understandable that I was misidentified. And We didn't have any conversations about that. We didn't have any conversations about my family's personal participation in the theft of land, going clear back to just before the Indigenous Relocation Act of 1830. So back in Georgia. So, now I know that history, but we didn't talk about that. Those stories were not forward for us. We were not having those discussions. And so what ended up happening was that I made meaning. I made meaning and said, this is about my hair, and my hair is a form of exclusion for me. And I made meaning that as a white child, that I was not supposed to be talking about these issues. So, and that happened over and over and over where I was shushed. Another example of that is in middle school, when we were told by our social studies teacher to do a class or a report on anything we wanted that was a humanitarian issue. And I chose to do a project on a housing project in Chicago called Cabrini Green. I don't know how I knew in little old Eastern Oregon about Cabrini Green. I had no idea how I even found out about that, but I did, and it was really troublesome to me. And we were told we had to find 10 sources to cite for our bibliography. And I could only find 9. This is pre-internet, right? This is when we're looking at periodicals. I'm aging myself a bit here, but this is probably many of you understand that. Like, we're looking for periodicals, we're looking for newspaper articles, and I could only find 9 sources to cite. I went to my teacher and I said, I can only find 9. Can you please, is it okay if I do my project anyway? And my teacher told me, any subject that doesn't have at least 10 sources about it is probably not very important to discuss. And so I was not allowed to continue to write my project, and I had to change my project. I cared about injustice as a child, but over and over and over, I was taught that those things don't matter, that they're not worth a discussion. We didn't talk about, publishing injustice. We didn't talk about the disproportionate ability for white folks to get published versus Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks to get published about the issues in their communities. And so this has just happened over and over and over in my story. And by the time I grow up and I move to Portland when I'm 19, I am living a completely segregated life, and I am no longer asking questions. I'm no longer curious. I am living around white-bodied people. I am working with white folks. I am friends with white folks. And I'm really, really just 100%. And we can do this in Portland, right? We can live a segregated life. And so that's my experience. I meet my husband, Jomo Greenidge, who identifies as Black West Indian, when I was 27. And in the first 2 weeks of us meeting, he could immediately tell, which I understand now why, but it took me a while to understand why he could tell that I had no clue about this conversation. And he gave me 2 books. One of them was called Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys by Jiwanja Kunjufu. And Jiwanja Kunjufu opens that book up with a definition of genocide, and then goes into a 1.5-page bullet point list of the ways that we're enacting genocide on 4th grade Black boys in our United States education system. And I threw the book across the room, and I called Jomo and I said, wow, what is this? Like, what? I had no clue. I just was unconscious to that. And he said, look, I don't know why you're calling me. I need you to get off the phone, and I need you to keep reading, because you and I have no future if you don't understand this stuff, because you're not safe for me. And I don't know why he invested in me in that way. He would say that when he first met me, he saw someone who had compassion for people and the capacity to understand. And so he held me capable and able to change and to grow. And he is my first and most lasting teacher, and I'm eternally grateful for him. And so I come to this space with you as educators with lots of education stories, how white children become impacted and become socially conditioned into this system through the ways that we behave, the books we read, the things we talk about, the ways that we tell children they can't research things because they can't meet our standards of 10 things to cite on a bibliography. And so these are just the rules and the systems that are all in place that then uphold the system of white dominance, and then recreate it. We rebirth it, we seed it back into our children. And so in May, I ended up popping onto Facebook and asking people that I do this work with, do y'all want some work? And I originally phrased it as, do y'all want some anti-racist parenting work? And got a ton of responses. And then a ton of responses from educators. Over 150 people said, yes, please. Can we go? We have some conversations that we need to be having about how to do this work with children, with white children. And so I went to work and I started writing a course, a self-directed course that it really turned into a multi-generational vision for abolition. So it's a course that works for anyone aged 3 to 125. There's something in there that is going to help us understand as white-bodied folks what it is that we need to do and the work we need to do. And as when Nicole approached me and said, hey, I think our school district would like to work with you, what would that look like? I said, I think this would be a great place to start. And so then we had conversations around, oh shoot, what does that mean? How do we do a PD where teachers are used to coming in and being talked to or at? And then now we're talking about something that's self-directed. How do we make sure that folks are able to engage it? How do we make sure that folks are able to get the most out of it? And so we started developing a plan. And so today we're going to talk a little bit more about our plan. I want to make sure we can move into our affinity spaces, and in the white-bodied affinity space, that's where we're going to be talking more about the plan, about what it is I'm going to be asking you all to do and how I'm going to be engaging with you throughout the fall. But before we do that, Nicole, are you able to go back to sharing slides for a second? And I want to just offer you a thought about, I can see you talking, but I can't hear you.
Dang it, I did it. You can share. I make fun of people who do that.
Okay.
You can.
Let me get to that part in our slideshow. Awesome. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yay, look at that. All right. I want to offer everyone here, just as somebody who's not in an education system, I do consider myself an educator, but I'm not in a school. And right now, I've been talking to my folks a lot about that we are in a time of liminal space. And I'm going to describe what that means, but liminal space is a place that we can activate as an agent of justice. The change that Nicole was talking about, that we have so much that we're dealing with that is changing, and a lot of feelings are coming up about that. But this is a place where we get to really lean into liminal space and allow it to be an agent of justice, an agent of change, an agent of abolition. So what is liminal space? Liminal is a word that means threshold. It is mainly used in anthropology. It is often called the space between, and it refers to the moments or times of transition and change that are all around us. Leaving home, moving, changing careers, a pandemic uprising, etc. These places and periods are where change is happening. Where change is happening are the moments when other big shifts become more possible, where there are a lot more opportunities for change than usual. Dave Gray wrote this book called Liminal Thinking, and I highly recommend it. And he talks about that this understanding about liminal space is what leaders will need for the future generations. We need to understand that it's actually in this place, and Nicole's already referenced it, that when we're uncomfortable, when it's hard, that's actually the spot where we can transition and change. And the reason is because everything's not stuck back into place. You know, you think about back when you were in your teens or early 20s and you left home for the first time. These examples come from Dave Gray. Except for pandemic uprising, I added that because that's where we were at. But leaving home, he talks about, look, when you leave home, you don't know, how you're going to live. You don't know how you're going to put food on the table. You don't really know, what your norms are going to be. Everything's up in the air. And in that time is the time where you get to add in the things that you want to add in so that you can become the kind of people you say you want to be, and you can let go of the things that are no longer serving you or that are no longer in alignment with your values. And so moving even across town, you have to pick a different grocery store. You're going to have a new route to work or to school, etc. This pandemic uprising time we are in a liminal space. It is the messy space between that we're in. And so how do we harness that space? So there's, in liminal space, there's this idea that we were something. Who we were in February of this year is different than who we are today. And so then as we go along, this is the liminal space, the space between who we were. And the way we go through that is not a straight line, and it is not easy, and it is complicated, and it is messy, and it is where we need grace, and it is not perfect, and it is where we need to appreciate one another and stretch and grow, and that possibility then becomes who we will be. And so I just want to offer this to you all to understand that as uncomfortable as I'm imagining you to be, moving into a school year, doing virtual school plus all of the other things, that is the messiness of liminal space. That is the hardness. That is the reworking everything. Okay, the things we used to do, the lesson plans that we loved to do before. Me too. I've got sessions, whole sessions that I love doing with people that I can't really do very well over Zoom. But imagine we wouldn't be able to be across this whole district like this very successfully without this space, without, being able to move together, without Zoom, without breakout rooms, without the possibility of kind of thinking differently. And so it's in this liminal space that we come in and we're moving through it. We're doing it. And so just keep that in mind as you go forward, that this is the space. This is a tremendous opportunity for us to shift. Several months ago, some of the greatest organizers of our time would not have thought we were on the cusp of defunding police. They would not have thought that we were on the cusp of changing how we do school. They would not have thought we were on the cusp of how our work norms have changed. We maybe don't need to be working full 8-hour days. What would that look like? Maybe children don't need to be in school the length of time. What would that look like? We're just in this place of possibility. And so be thinking about that as you go into our breakout rooms. So we're going to move into breakout rooms, and then I'm going to talk more with my folks about what they can expect this fall. And Nicole's going to do whatever she's going to do.